to make a choice. Sometimes not just one out of two, but it's still the same process. First thing I just want to mention very briefly, but most importantly, is this is all about making money, whether you've got wool sheep or meat sheep. Today I'm going to be sort of covering the process as either wool sheep or meat sheep producers would do it. It's really quite a similar process, obviously different traits involved. But the first thing is I just want to briefly say that it is all about making money. The slide that's on the screen now is just a summary of a trial that was run in New South Wales on a large wheat sheep property where about 1,000 ewes were joined to either terminal size with high growth or with medium to low growth. And the bottom line there is in red is showing that there's about a $700 return per year from from buying a high growth rams compared to moderate growth rams. And you'll see down that slide there the price per kilo when the trial was done was $3.50, and it's probably at least $4.50 now, maybe even higher. And so that $700 per ram per year is something more like $1,000 in today's market place. And that's not total, that's extra. So this is about making serious money. It's not just a feel-good process. The selection process I'm going to work through has got 5 steps in it. Those steps are to do with setting your breeding objective, grading rams on measured performance, and then that's done prior to your sale. And I'm going to talk as if we're going to an auction sale, but it works equally as well as if you're buying rams private treaty. Then the step 3 is looking at the group of rams visually overall. Then 4 is to grade them on their visual, the visual traits that are important to you. And then the final thing is to set a price for the grades as you see them. The key points that I want to just get out of today's webinar is firstly setting a breeding objective, and that's not just some theoretical thing for me to drop in. It's very much an important part of the process. If you don't know what you're trying to select for, then you've got no way, no matter how good your process is, no matter how good your technology is, it's all to no avail if you haven't got a clear idea of what you're after. And we'll talk more about that. Then using breeding values, or ASBVs as the sheep industry calls them, or EBVs as the cattle industry calls them. So we'll deal with that in a brief way, but I hope it gives you a good start if you haven't already got that. Importance of getting a balance between the measured and visual traits in your objective. Some people can deal with one or the other, but often struggle to get it right across the range of things, and everybody's got a mix of both of those. So you need to really get a good balance. The fourth point is to grade the whole catalogue. some people just think that if they are after 3 rams, they can go along, tick half a dozen and end up with them on the back of the ute. And that so often falls into a hole because we haven't all got deep pockets. We can't all buy the rams we exactly want. So we need a process to be able to select what we want but meet the market in the end. And then is part 5, where we're dealing with setting up a price limit for each of the grades. And then the practicality of taking them home, you've got to have rams that are fit. Hopefully your ram supplier has done that job well, but even at the last moment you should do that check. Okay, the first part of it, setting up the breeding objective. I think a lot of people don't have a really clear idea. They might have it somewhere in their head, but unless they've got it written down, I think it's probably not that effective. You can use words like I've got there. That's not, I'm not trying to suggest they're the ideal words or the ideal breeding objective, but they're just an example where somebody's tried to present their breeding objective as words. You can see that it introduces individual traits, but often doesn't say how much or by when, or in the end how much emphasis they've got on those traits relative to each other. So what I've presented here now on the screen is a list of the measured traits that a range of people might use for a terminal sire flock, but we could have a similar list for wool flock, and obviously they'd have some additional traits in fleece weight, fibre diameter, etc. But again, a similar process. And what I've got on the right-hand side in the emphasis column is a percentage where hopefully it should add up to 100%. But that provides you with an understanding of moving on from the words into exactly how much emphasis that is on each of those traits in your breeding objective. I think if people sort of work through that, there's no absolute number that is right or wrong for any individual, but the process of doing that allows them to get a clear understanding of where the trade-offs are. Usually when you do this for a start, you end up with 150%. You want a lot more of everything, but in the end, if you can trim it down to 100%, then you've got it right. And the hard decisions are made for when you're making the selections. As well as the measured traits, is obviously visual traits. Again, traits vary between people, but one thing that I do want to sort of stress is these percentages are emphasis, not importance. So importance might be when you're thinking about, well, we've got to have structural soundness. Without structural soundness, then all the production traits won't work effectively. So that might be very important, but if in the end when you go to your ram sale, all the rams are structurally important, structurally correct, then you really don't have to apply any selection pressure on that. As important it is, the ram breeder has done all that hard work for you, and you can put your emphasis when you're making your selections on other traits in your breeding objective. So it is all about that emphasis that you're applying at selection rather than what might be most important, whether it's some theoretical approach to sheep selection or dollars terms. It's how much you need to apply on the day. Breeding objectives, particularly for measured traits, are often expressed as an index, which is a way of combining all the traits. Indexes are great. There's standard indexes around. They provide a good, what I call a headline approach to selection, where you get an idea of the overall outcome, and then you need to get down to the individual traits and make the final selections. So they're a good way to start, as long as the index is suitable for your breeding objective. There's a index that's commonly used in the terminal sire industry, Carcass Plus Index. You can see growth traits adding up to about 65%, eye muscle and fat. Another index for terminal size, same traits as we just had, but there we've added worm resistance and birth weight into the breeding objective. So make sure that the index is suitable. There's also similar indexes for wool shed merino. So there are 3 standard merino indexes, and you'll probably see as I flick through these that they are quite different. But just think about one trait in that pie chart, the fibre diameter component of that index. For that index, it's about 20%. If we move on to the next index, fibre diameter is over 50%, 55%. And then in the dual purpose index, there's no emphasis effectively on fibre diameter. So they're really very different indexes just by looking at that trait. So make sure you get the right index if you're going to use one. Sometimes in sale catalogues they'll just have the word index, and if it's not the right one, it'll send you definitely down the wrong track. Okay, well that's effectively step 1. So in summary, the main thing is make sure that you're thinking about the emphasis you want to apply to the traits. It's not about the importance of the traits, it's about what you need to apply at selection time. Step 2 is to grade the rams on measured performance. Now, irrespective of your breeding objective and which you think is most important, either measured traits or visual traits. I'm sure there's many discussions have been held about that, but it still comes first in practical terms, because most people get a catalogue in the mail or these days on the web, and so before they go to the sale they can do lots of homework and effectively grade the rams on the measured traits, how they see them. And what I would recommend is that people not only grade the whole catalogue, but they have varying grades. Some people will just pick rams that they think are suitable, and there must be a variation in the level of suitability. And so if you just put one tick against them, effectively what you're saying is that they're all equal, all those ticks are equal, and I don't think that can be a reasonable proposition. So you need to grade the rams, well, whether you use numbers like I've suggested here, or 3 ticks or 2 ticks, 1 tick, whatever your system is, you need to have a way of differentiating between the different rams. Of course, there will be rams that are just totally unsuitable, and you can put a cross through those. I'm not suggesting that you have to take home something that's unsuitable for your situation, but you know, if you're at a sale and there's a lot of rams that are got a cross through them, then I think the proposition is that you've come to the wrong place, because most of the rams should be, in general terms, suitable, and it's just how suitable they are is the important thing. Okay, so just a little bit about the type of performance information you'll see these days. They're called breeding values, or ASBVs, often with terms like ASBVs, we forget about what the letters stand for. Whether you're using ASBVs or EBVs, if you're buying bulls, they're all talking about breeding values. And there is, that's a very suitable words because they tell you what the breeding value of that particular ram is, not about its performance so much, but about what performance its progeny will have. So they are provided by the ram breeder to their clients. They take the raw performance information and adjust that information for things that will make it more accurate. In summary, ASBVs predict how a ram's progeny will perform. And really, if you're buying rams, that's exactly what you want. You don't make any money out of the ram per se. You make it out of their progeny, no matter what sheep you're breeding. So you'll see lots of different formats in catalogues and pen cards and that sort of thing. But in summary, if they've got ASBVs, they have something like we're seeing on the screen now. A logo that tells you the breed type, the traits that are being reported to you, the actual performance information for that trait. So for this trait, PWT is post-weaning weight, a value of 16.5. Then there is an accuracy value, and you don't need to, if you're a commercial ram buyer, you don't need to differentiate based on that. Basically, the reason why it's there is to tell you it's an ASBV. So if there is a number in that accuracy area, then you know it's an ASBV. Ram breeders often present what their flock average is. Sometimes it's the industry average, but in this case it's the flock average. We not only have individual traits reported, but often indexed as well. So back to our two rams. Which of those two rams are you going to buy for me? If all I'm interested in is the highest growth ram, which of those two, if they're standing in a pen, would you buy for me? If we've just got their own performance, whether it's how they look to you standing in the pen or their actual body weight, then you're missing out on a lot of information. The pedigree tells you a lot more about the performance of the individual ram that you're looking at, not only the mum and dad, but also half brothers and sisters. We add in measured performance, measured, scored, or these days genomic information, all add up to the performance records you've got for the individual. There's an adjustment for environment and management. Then different traits have got different levels of heritability. Simply how much of the ram's performance is passed on to his offspring, which obviously is critical when you're calculating breeding value, and then correlations between traits. So when you calculate a breeding value, all those things are in the calculation and add up to the individual trait's breeding value. So now we've got, if we've got a breeding value, we've got much more accuracy about making a decision. Those two rams, in actual fact, have got the same progeny performance, even though for growth they look totally different. They're actually born at the same time. They've been fed the same. Everything's the same, except there is one difference, one is a single born and one's a triplet. Their progeny's performance are exactly the same. It's just that one of them had to share with two brothers and sisters. So if we just tried to make the judgment on their own body weight or how they looked in the sale pen, we would get it totally wrong, because I think everybody would select the growthier bloke that's at the back and just disregard the one in the front as being totally irrelevant. So I think when you're thinking about breeding values, will they do a better job for me? Just think of those two rams, because I think they are a perfect picture in describing the advantage. Now, whether they're twins or singles is just one of the factors, and there are many others, whether they're late or early drop, etc., etc. So in total, they can add up to a huge amount of difference. We're only dealing with one in this case. Okay, just ASBVs are not applied across the whole sheep industry. There's different ASBVs for different types of sheep. Merinos are in one group, Doonies in another, terminal breeds, all the terminal breeds in another group, and the same with maternal breeds are grouped together, except for SAMs who are in a different group. The logos that you'll see presented in catalogues, etc., sometimes they're for the group of Merinos in this case. Doonies have got a different logo, and all the maternals and terminals are in one. We've got one logo, which is just a quality assurance process. Just remember, if you're buying Merinos and Pole Dorsets, for example, then you can't compare the breeding values of those two different breeds. They're different. So within the blue circles on there, you can select within those blue circles, but not across them. There's quite a lot more information on ASBVs if you want it, and if you go to the Sheep Genetics website, you can get that type of information that's in that booklet, or if you Google ASBV sheep CRC, you'll get that booklet, which has got a lot of information in easy to read, but gives you some more background. And that's just one example of that information. It tells you about the different ages that apply, how to read summaries of traits like PWT, what's that mean, post-weaning weight, but there are lots of others, which are pretty logical when you get into them, but not so much necessarily to start off with. Okay, Mark, do you want to see if there's any questions that we can cover now after we've been through that section?
Yeah, so just halfway through now, or about 3/4 of the way through, just wondering if anybody's got any questions. I did have one here before. I think my sheep are too fine at 19 micron. Do I put emphasis on positive or negative for fibre diameter?
Sorry, Mark, I couldn't quite hear that. Could you just say that again, please?
I think my sheep are too fine at 19 micron. Do I put emphasis on positive or negative fibre diameter?
On positive, because those the positive and negatives aren't trying to describe either good or bad. They're describing the direction that you're trying to go in. So for fibre diameter, if you're trying to increase your fibre diameter or let it drift higher, then you'd be using positive values. If you're trying to reduce the level of worms you've got, you're using a minus breeding value for that, because you're after less worms. So when you just sort of get your head around that it's telling you the direction you're selecting for not whether it's good or bad, then the pluses and minuses work for you.
Yeah. So if anybody's got any questions, they can either talk.
It's Bob, Alan. Yeah, am I on?
Yeah, Bob, have to say that again.
It's Bob. Okay. We often have trouble with heavy birth weight. How many people contributing to ASBP have birth weights, and is it possible that you can go too low in selecting birth weight?
Yes, on the first part of it, how many people? It varies between breeds. There's not a lot of people recording birth weight for merinos, more for maternals, and a large majority of terminal breeders are, because I think that's an indication of the issue for that type of sheep. So terminals have had a really high push on growth. There's a high correlation, or quite a reasonable correlation, between growth at the age of turning off lambs and the actual birth weight. So they got themselves into a situation where birth weights were probably over the top for some situations. So, but on the other side of the question, yes, you certainly can go too low. Lambs with low birth weight don't have as good a survival, so you can overrun your desire in that to sort of modify the bigger birth weights that are around at the sort of top end. But I think you also need to take into account the type of ewes they're going over, and the type of season that you're lambing into. If you're lambing into part of the season when you've got lots of feed about, then the birth weights of your lambs are going to be higher generally. So where people that are lambing into a poorer part of the season don't have that much issue any rate. So it's a trait that is reasonably complex to get it right for your situation. But I think there is a group of the industry that has just gone over the top on it. You know, they've heard the story and they're really pushing back on birth weight when maybe that's not necessary for them.
Yeah, so if anybody else has got a question, you can just type it in the box or unmute yourself to ask the question. So I think that's probably it for questions now, Alan. Yes, right. If anybody has a question along the way, just feel free to type it in the box, and then we'll ask it at the end, or Alan will answer it on the way through.
Okay. So we've sort of done the theory to some extent with working through how ASBVs are calculated, etc. But I think for people who haven't run into them, they can still be quite tricky to navigate, because the number that's presented doesn't necessarily mean anything to them. We've covered one of those where they're plus and minuses, but over and above that, there is still the size of that number is that number that's there against that ram a big number or a small number, or high performer or good performer. So we need to get our heads around that. So I'm just going to work through a couple of little examples to try and cover that. So if we're dealing with a terminal sire flock and ram in the catalogue has got a post-weaning weight of about 8.2, is that a high or low terminal performance? So if I said that ram was 80 kilos himself, that would mean something to people, and so they can feel comfortable. But 8.2 What in the hell does that mean? No, nothing, unless you've been around these numbers for a while. So if we're looking at a sale catalogue that looks like that, up the top of the catalogue, it's got something about the flock performance. The flock average in this case for post-weaning weight is 9. The highest ram in the catalogue is 10.8. The lowest 7.5. So if we look at the first pen and it's got a post-weaning weight of 8.2, that's somewhere around about the middle or a bit below the middle of the sale group. So we can compare the flock average with the individual in the pen and say, okay, pen 1's a little below the average of the flock. You look at the next pen down, it's 10.2, he's above average, he's getting up towards the higher end of the sale. So we've within that flock, we've got a scale, and we're now starting to get a grip of what this funny number of 8.22 means to us. We've probably been buying rams at this flock for a while, so we're happy enough with the performance of the rams, and now we've got a way of judging whether it's good, bad or indifferent. So that's a start of the process, but what it doesn't tell us is where 8.2 relates to across the industry generally. We're happy enough with this flock, but if we went to other flocks, would we see something quite different? Now, just while we've got this ram in front of us, so if I was grading this ram and all I was interested in is post-weaning weight, I suppose I would grade him, 1, 2 or 3, 1 being best system. I would grade that because it's around the middle of the range as a 2. And we'll talk more about that later. Okay, but how do we think about this ram if we're looking across all the flocks, terminal sire flocks in the industry? If we, for example, were looking at a ram that had a post-weaning weight now of 14.5, how does that judge? Now, the way to do that is there's a thing called a percentile band table or report. It's a horrific looking thing. It looks like that. It's got all the traits across the top, including indexes, and down the side it's got percentile bands where it lies. A 50% band is average, effectively. So across that top of that table, there's the third trait across is post-weaning weight, and what we're looking at is that percentile band table compares all the rams in the current drop, and that's what we're interested in. How does it line up with others that might be available for sale? It describes a sheep's performance compared to all the other sheep in the drop, and it's across the full range of rams in that particular analysis. And we have it for both traits and individual traits and indexes. You've just got one thing that often some people fall in the trap of is they think it describes the best and worst. That's not the case. The best and worst is described by your breeding objectives. One case in point we were just talking about, birth weight, probably in general the middle of the range is where most people would have their breeding objective, not up the top end of the columns. So don't think about it as best and worst. So just quickly how to use it. Make sure that you've got the right breed in, because there's a different breed for terminals and maternals and merinos and doonies. You'll find the trait that you're interested in this case post-weaning weight. So we've got that group there. We're looking at try to find out what 14.5 means. Is that good, bad and different? We scroll up that column until we hit the value that we're interested in. We get to 14.3, and then the next number is 14.8, so 14.5 is in the middle there. So you drop back to the 14.3 and then go across to the percentage band that's on the far left, and it's 15%. So this particular RAM is in the top 15% for that particular trait across all the RAMs in that drop. So now we've got a real understanding of how these funny numbers, or what these funny numbers mean. 14.5, now we've got quite a good feeling for where it falls in the system. If you see that on a catalogue, then you know it's in the top end of the drop. Probably the top 5% hardly see the light of sale pens. They're usually held by the RAM breeders for their own use. So really, when you're in the top 10 or 15%, you're really dealing with the top end. By the way, there's that 8.2. He's in the top 90%, or another way of not so kindly looking at it, is in the bottom performance for that trait. So he's an animal that seemed like about average when we looked at our individual flock, but when we look across the industry, he's pretty ordinary, if that trait is what your breeding objective is after. Okay, so it's important to get an understanding of where those numbers lie for the traits of interest. Otherwise, as much as they've got value, lots of value, they'll be very difficult for you to use when you come to a sale. The other part of the job then is, once you've got a feel for what the numbers mean, is where does my flock lie. So what I've got on that slide is the percentile band table, and I've just covered the range in performance that my flock that I'm buying rams for covers. So while we might have an aspiration to buy rams right at the top end of that column, if we want more growth, then that mightn't necessarily be all that possible, because your budget limits you. So you need to understand where your flock presently is and aim for rams at least at the top end of that range, or above it if possible. And then we've got something realistic we can aim for. Now, the higher we can get, then obviously the better, but be practical about it. Don't just think of, what is the highest and I'll aim for that, because unless you've got unlimited funds, you'll end up with an empty ute and no progress at all. So if we wanted to grade the rams in the sale on performance, if I put in the performance for the range in the sale in that red box, that tells me what's available in the sale, and now we've got a comparison about what I've got at home and what is available. Then I can go through and grade those rams when I come to them in the sale catalogue. So, for example, the ones at the top end of the range, I might grade them as 1s. The middle would be 2s, and 3s at the bottom end. Now, hopefully they're not rams I end up having to buy, but at least I'm in a position where I have got a value on them if the sale exceeds my budget at the top end. Remembering if you actually don't buy in the sale, then what your next proposition, you may go down the road and buy from somewhere else, but most people, their way of doing it is buying RAMs that are available after the sale, and they're probably most likely even further down that list. So to some extent, some people think, well, they're just not RAMs that I should even be interested in, but I think they're what I would see them as RAMs that are hopefully RAMs I don't have to buy, but if I am out of the market on the higher performing ones, then I've got a value on those, and I've probably got RAMs that are better than the ones that are available after the sale. So those RAMs at the bottom end, I think I could grade as 3. Okay, that's all my homework before the sale. Now, when I get to the sale, I think before you start looking at individual RAMs, you need to get an overall view of the RAMs. From season to season, the way RAMs are presented will be quite different, and particularly with merinos and Doonies, wool sheep, that wool will look quite different. So you need to get an overall view of how they're performing for those traits before you make decisions about individual RAMs. Then step 4 is going through and doing the visual grading. So as well as the measured grade, then look at which you've got marked down in your catalogue. Then you look at the visual grades, grade those, and then without necessarily even putting down that grade, that visual grade, you can just step straight on to writing down what your combined grade for both measured and visual traits are. And the way I do that is if I, for example, we look back at our Pen 1, we've graded the RAM for measured traits as a grade 2 because he was below average for that trait. Now obviously in practical terms that measured grade is done on just more than one trait because you more than normally got more than one trait in your breeding objective. So I'm just simplifying it in this case, not suggesting you should only be using one trait. Then if, for example, I think he's ideal on the visual traits of interest, and I grade him as a 1, then overall I would grade that RAM as a 2. Because he's visually a grade 1, I really can't grade him overall a 1 because he doesn't really meet that measured grade that I've got in my breeding objective. And vice versa, if he was a grade 3 for visual traits, then the fact that he's got poor conformation or fleece rot or whatever the trait of interest is that is grading him down, then no matter how good he is for the measured traits, then he really can't override the performance of that visual trait that is pushed him down to a 3. So if I had a 2 for measured performance and a 3 for visual, I would grade him as a 3, and I think that's the right balance. Okay, so the last step is then to apply a price against each of the grades you've allocated to the RAMs in your catalogue, and you can work through that in a process and work out how much extra performance will make you, as I showed you in that trial right at the start. There is a way of just simply doing that, so you can do it in that way, or you might have a limit that you're applying because of a budget situation. But whichever the process you need, I don't think sensibly, you can look at all the rams in the catalogue that you think are suitable to take home and be prepared to pay the one price for them, because again, that would suggest they're all equally as good as each other. So once you've got your grade on the rams, then you can apply a price limit to each of those grades. We're all optimists and we hope we get them lower than that limit, but in the end, knowing what you can effectively, your business can make from those rams will allow if you can go up to that limit, it will effectively make money for your business. So in this little example I've given is where the rams that I might buy after the sale are worth $800 each. That's the private treaty grade price. An auction sale has a base price that the auction won't effectively go below. That's the pass-in price, some people might call it, and often that's the same as the private treaty grade price. In this example, I've given that base price as $800. My best rams, I'm prepared to go to $1,800 for those, $1,400, and for grade 3s, $1,000. Now, I'm not suggesting that is the price. That's something your business has got to sort out. But effectively across the grades, then you will have different price if you've done that effectively. So once you've got through that step, a really crucial step, because it's a really key part to your buying of rams at an auction, you're through the 5 steps. So just in summary, the really critical to have a clear breeding objective, understand the breeding, how you use breeding values, and what the different numbers mean in your situation relative to your flock and across the industry. Get the right balance when you make your selections between the measured traits and visual traits in your breeding objective. Some people have a nice breeding objective on paper, but then bugger it up when it comes to the practicality of selecting rams. Grade across the whole catalogue. Sure, if your rams are unsuitable, cross them out, but effectively having a price that differentiates across the rams that are suitable. Stick to your upper limit that you've put on them. Some people get carried away with the sale and pay more than their limit. Often it's a matter of holding your nerve. And the final thing is check the rams before you put them on the truck and take them home. You can't do that before the auction starts. If everybody did that, there'd be chaos. But it's something you should do before you go, even if they've had a vet check, which is hopefully happening where you're buying your rams. And so when you do that check, that's what you're looking at. There is some information on how to manage your rams across the season. You paid a lot of money for them. You should keep them in fit condition, and how to check them before you actually join them to make sure that they are up to the job. Okay, Mark, that's I've got a couple of other little bits if we've got time, but maybe questions now.
Yep, no worries. Thanks for that, Alan. There's a couple of questions that have come through. How can they obtain a percentile band report?
The Sheep Genetics website. So if you just Google sheep genetics and percentile band, then that will come up. There's different bands for each of the breed groups, so make sure you get the right one there. So
Yes.
It's a matter of just going to the Sheep Genetics website. It does change, that percentile band changes every couple of weeks, but don't worry about it. Those changes are only really very small, and what you're trying to do is just trying to get a feel for, you know, okay, my 8.2 versus my 14.8 or whatever it was, you know, how do those two RAMs relate to each other? And once you've got a general feel for that, you don't really need to worry about the decimal places, just the overall perspective, because you're not trying to apply the percentile band to every RAM that's in the catalogue. You're just trying to use that to get your head around the numbers, whether they're big or small or in the middle.
Yeah, no worries. There's a next one. Post-weaning weight is an absolute value or adjusted for birth status, e.g. twin.
It's adjusted value. So each of those ASBVs are adjusted for all that information that the RAM breeder makes available. Now, for example, terminal sire breeders would almost always have that information available in their data that would get included in the analysis. Some Merito breeders don't have that information on all their RAMs. They might have it on the better end of their RAMs, but not on all of them. So just talk to your RAM breeder, understand what type of information he's putting into his data. So, for example, if you're interested in birth weight, for example, you'd be wanting your RAM supplier to be actually measuring that trait, so those breeding values are most accurate.
Yep, no worries. And another question, being a RAM breeder, how can I start using and recording ASBVs for our flock?
It's really quite simple. You have to be a signed up member of Sheep Genetics to get ASBVs if you're a RAM breeder. So there's a little bit of administrative work to do, but effectively from the data point of view, I think what I would suggest is RAM breeders capture the performance of the primary traits that they and their clients would be looking for. I often see people go over the top. They look at the whole list. They try to do that. They try to be everything for everybody, and usually topple over and end up being, you know, giving themselves too big a job. So just start with the basic situation and move on from there if that all works for you. Pedigree information is also a really critical part of collecting ASBV data, because it's the pedigree that links one drop of RAMs with another drop, both on that property and other properties. So without pedigree information, then you haven't got that linkage. And in that situation, you get ASBVs, but only, well, they're not even called ASBVs, they're called flock breeding values. So they're the same technology, but only can be compared within that flock. So sometimes that's where people start, because they haven't got the linkage that will compare them with the other flocks. So for their clients, that's obviously a big step up from either looking at the RAM in the pen as he stands, or even the actual measured information. It's a big step up. So that's a good interim step, and people shouldn't look down their noses at flock breeding values as being, you know, totally rubbish, because they're really good value, or they just don't allow you to compare across to other RAM breeders.
No, thanks for that. If anybody else has got any questions, yeah, you can either unmute yourself and ask them, or type it in the box. There is a short quiz that I've pasted into that box, just a survey. If you'd like to do that for us, just a bit of feedback. This will all be recorded on the website.